We started. Let me see if we're live. Live streaming. Crap. Okay. Well, it says we're trying. I just can't get. Hmm. Okay. It says live. Healthy stream. And we got a chat box open. Let me check the chat. Say something. Hello. Okay, so that works. All right. Um. Okay, so we're talking to Nick de Vera is on disturbing trends, and we're going to talk about some of the recent subjects of interest to our listening audience. And we decided we were going to talk about Kanye West first. And I know so little about him, but Nick probably does. So you want to start it off? You were about to start.
Well, I don't really know the guy, not a fan. I just remember him as he was a meme before, and he's a meme again now. Like, he was a guy before George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Yeah, I remember that after Hurricane Katrina, George Bush doesn't like black people, and he's a rap star. I don't know. I might have heard his music. I'm not familiar with it.
I'm pretty sure I haven't. It's just a guy mouthing off on Twitter, and that seems par for the course. The interesting bit I find is how other people in the left are reacting to it. And so both sides, how the right is spinning it as just because someone is breaking away from lefty orthodoxy, we must cast him out. We must burn him at the stake. It's mostly goofy stuff, but it's like, so he took a picture with a MAGA hat, and
Signed by Donald Trump.
that gets you ostracized apparently. I've always had a bit of difficulty really understanding that, how that plays out in like American culture. Like, I didn't like Trump when the election was happening, and I thought he was a bad choice. But I found it fascinating how when he won, so the left was all falling
Hyster-
apart and crying,
hysterical.
and the right was like, he's not perfect, but at least the left hates him, which seems like a weird justification. How do you feel about Trump?
The only, it's kind of complicated. I was uh, like a lot of people. I was horrified when he was campaigning, but um, the the fact that he's trolling a lot of people on the far left, I think is great. I don't like the fact that what comes with the package, even though he probably doesn't give a rat's ass about some of these subjects like religion, but somebody like Mike Pence, I don't like that that's coming in with the package, and um, the religious cultural issues. That's fine if you have a religion, whatever religion you have, and that's your culture or the subjects that are important to you. Perfectly fine with me, but when it starts intruding into government, what we're going to talk about later is like Islam in Europe, starting. Some people fear it's starting to intrude in their lives, and people in this country don't want. They scream about Sharia law coming to America. Well, I don't want any religious law in America. I don't want that. That's the part that really unsettles me about any Republican that brings up, brings in a camp of religious people to legislate morality.
It's fascinating because it's sort of what got me into politics and got me interested is we got Duterte a little before Trump, and it's a trend that you see everywhere with Brexit and everything else. It's like, I'm pretty much center left, and I want the left to win, but I don't see that they're doing such a great job. and I hope that they do better. But that's the thing with Kanye breaking from orthodoxy, and then everyone saying that he's internalized racism or some demented crap.
Well, what
So
that
it
is there's it's identity politics. There's an expectations. If you're in a certain group, if you have a skin color or religion or identity, you have to think monolithically, and if you don't, then you're an Uncle Tom or you're a betrayer.
so yeah, it's an amusing thing. It's so obviously tribal, and the goofy stuff. People are talking about how Kanye said that he and Trump are both dragon energy, and I was wondering if that's going to be a meme now. Like, and then Elon posted that he was doing something, making a dragon, and I think Peterson talked about dragon stuff too. So it's like the worst Lord of the Rings remake.
Dragons and swords. Do you think we're going to have a comeback of dragons and swords?
Well, Peterson would say like it's just how people think about it. It's like the enemy and the thing that you have to slay. It sort of ties into the stuff how people looking for simple good and evil stories, and you have to have a dragon to slay. And there's no, you don't get to land on Normandy beach and punch a Nazi in the face anymore. Well, they found a way. So now you just find someone and call them a Nazi and then punch them.
Right. So now it's how can you tell if someone's a Nazi if they disagree with you?
If they're not sufficiently left enough. If they're to the right of you, they're a Nazi.
Well, if they don't pass all the purity tests.
If they're infected with cooties from the other tribe.
That's true. So Conway's in the crosshairs. I'm seeing people saying don't stop following him on Twitter because blah blah blah. So he's pissing people off. Now he pissed the people that are all cheering him on now. He pissed off when you were talking earlier about George Bush hates black people. He pissed all the George Bush fans off and probably other people. You think he's deliberately controversial? He's like a big star, right?
Not in a Machiavellian way. Maybe in more like just uh, in a more diva drama kind of way. Maybe. Or it could just be really be sincere. Maybe there's not really all that much thinking going into it.
That's true. So maybe we shouldn't think too much about it. Have you heard about the recent cancellation of the Lindsay Shepherd talk she was giving in Waterloo?
I gotta look at it. So she wanted Faith Goldie
Yes.
and the usual thing, heckler's veto. So apparently a lot of people said they were going to protest, so it would cost too much to have security at the thing, so they canceled it.
Well, yeah. The Waterloo demanded like $28,000 for security, and it is the
uh, it's
heckler's veto.
it's just another thing that another step on the road to this is how it is now. Apparently, if there's speech that we don't like, there's no trick too dirty to make it not happen. Platforming and deplatforming is part of the discourse now. I don't like you, so I'll harass you to make it impossible for you to get your stuff out there.
Well, it's the to simplify it, which you already did, but even more simple than that. A bully gets his way. If the bully comes up to you bigger than you on the schoolyard, pushes you over and takes your lunch money, laughs and walks away, guess what? You don't have your lunch money, he does. So the bully wins. And this is a trend over the last couple of years, and not just on the left, but it's being played out an awful lot on the left, where if we don't want to hear you talk, then we'll try whatever. There's no trick too dirty, like you said. Pull the alarm, fire alarm, protest, make it too expensive.
Make a death threat or a bomb threat, anything goes. I think it's part of like a bigger thing, like at the root of it, it's everyone competing for attention now. So the radicalization, it's like if you're a moderate centrist, you're not as interesting. So you have to be radically left or radically right to get airtime or get attention. And it's what you see playing out on YouTube and everywhere else. It's no one wants to uh, meet or find middle ground anymore. It's just we're right and you're wrong. Like the Dan Killer thing. Heard of that? Did you hear he's appealing the sentence?
Right, he got fined instead of sentenced to prison.
He made a video like he said he was ready to go to jail and he had like a whole thing prepped for it. That even if the judge gave him community service, he'd refuse to do it. And he got the fine. He said, "Yeah, screw that. I'm not paying it." And the GoFundMe that went way over. He's gonna fight it, and the target of the GoFundMe was something like £80,000, and he went over that in a day. That's sort of encouraging and impressive. Like, what does that entail if he's fighting it? So, does that mean he could still be on the hook for a conviction if he's gonna appeal the verdict?
Well, I think he's fighting the principle. So like with we talked about Jordan Peterson. The reason why he got propelled into the limelight was he said he would refuse to use compelled speech, and if he got fined or whatever, he wouldn't, you know. And when you challenge it all the way up the ladder, these are people that are not going to get punched in the nose and just wipe it off and walk away and get better. They're gonna stick their face out and say, I'm challenging the system. I'm challenging what I think is wrong. And with Count Dacula, he's he's saying it was a joke. It didn't hurt anybody, whether you agree with that or not. But I think the more important issue is in in the UK with free expression, and I keep seeing whether this is um, well, we talked about this in we were messaging whether some issues are just being exaggerated or not, but um, we see this people bringing up the hate patrolling, and police are instead of stopping burglars or whatever, they're trying to find people saying something hurtful online.
Apparently, they have a unit for this now.
That's what it
That
looks like.
yeah, they've said they've got some people, an actual unit doing this. That uh, some people are trying to call hashtag the special snowflake unit.
And there's a place um, for dangerous talk, really dangerous talk. Let's do something. So let's commit a crime. That's you know we're planning it online, and we've been seeing for years, ever since 2001, and the with the people trying to stop terrorism. They're looking for people planning things, and not just terrorism. And that's fine if you see, we're going to go rob a bank next. If you're stupid enough to put it online, well, then go in and stop these people, or we're making a bomb or something. But if it's there's a real fuzzy gray area where you're saying something that's offensive, or it hurts somebody's feelings, or in some cases it doesn't hurt anybody's feelings, but the police are arresting them anyway. I think that's what he's fighting. I think that's what Dankula is fighting, right?
Yeah, it's getting pretty obvious. I think we're winning over the we're winning over the middle ground there because it seems pretty obvious. The consensus pretty much is Dankula's video. Some people think it's funny, some people think it's in bad taste, but still within free speech. Not many people. There are a few people that think that it really is offensive and shouldn't be online, but fairly they're a fairly small minority, I feel, or that's what it looks like on Twitter. And another thing that's becoming really undeniable, it seems to be a real, like, bafflingly Orwellian thing that's happening in the UK. The girl that got a conviction from, what was it? Putting rap lyrics,
Oh
posting
yeah,
rap
yeah.
lyrics on her Instagram, and rap lyrics on your Instagram, hate speech, hate speech. So
So it's okay
shame,
if it's
shame.
played over the public airways, but not on Instagram, right? Because is that
It's
because
the
it's
thing,
out of context?
because apparently the way they're interpreting the law is that as long as there's offense and context doesn't matter, intent doesn't matter, as long as someone finds it offensive, and that's so bafflingly like anything. I find your hat offensive. It's cultural appropriation. Therefore, you're guilty of hate crime. Off with your head. Like,
I've said this before on some of my videos, but when I look at my Twitter feed, I'm offended all the time, and I don't mean like I'm crawling up into a ball and sucking my thumb, but I see things that I think are stupid, or just racist or offensive, and you know, the extreme stuff is you know, well, Twitter's gonna take them off, but I see things that are against what I believe in, and it's as you mature, you realize that other people have opinions that are different than you, and rather than um, being hysterical about it, saying, "Well, that person has an opinion about something that I completely disagree with." And when I say offensive, it just it offends my sense of how I think the world should be. But and I think, well, maybe I could change their mind, and in some cases I'll reply on Twitter and say I don't agree with that, or why did you say that, rather than report them to the police or have them shut down.
like it's becoming a joke now that the UK is turning into this dystopian Orwellian nightmare. Uh, who's the mayor of London
Sadiq Khan.
saying that we're gonna ban knives now, and feeds into everything else, like the gun people saying, where does it end? And obviously it doesn't end with guns. It'll keep going with knives and uh,
Sticks and
nasty
stones.
words until uh, it's the coddling apocalypse until we wrap everyone in bubble wrap.
I thought that was a joke. I thought that was. when they said he was going to ban. I thought somebody was just making fun of him. He's
Nah,
going
it
to,
was
yeah.
Sadiq Khan saying you have no reason to carry a knife around, and a lot of reasonable people were saying, "What? I'm a fisherman. I'm a workman. I need the knife for fucking work. Like, what the hell are you talking about?"
Well, in England, they don't have the populace doesn't carry guns, and it's the next thing I guess. So after the knives, they'll go after what? Box cutters and then pointy sticks.
It's and like even there was another thing somewhere on Twitter, like the thing with Alfie Evans, the guy with the kid in the hospital. That's a whole other mess. But like the one thing I want to zero in on is like, so a lot of people are upset about this. It's a thing apparently in a UK hospital, a guy with his son on life support, and a tweet from an official police force account saying we are monitoring social media accounts and action might be taken. Like, God, like Orwell is spinning in his grave.
So what's the lowdown with that? The child is going to die, and what Italy offered to make him a citizen, bringing him in to try to see if they can help, but the British system isn't allowing him to be released. The baby.
That's what I've gotten so far. The one thing that I was really baffled about is that you've got official police Twitter accounts saying, like, almost literally, Big Brother is watching you. Watch what you say, or we might be knocking on your door. Like, God, watch what you say. And I wonder what they do there. Like, so if this is really the thing that they've got a special snowflake unit watching Twitter and everything else. So if I'm in England and I just say I'm not in England, I'm in the Philippines, I'm in Japan, or I'm in Russia. So screw you. I can just say or post whatever I want. I'm not in your jurisdiction. So what? Like, do they really have the juice to track all the IP addresses? No, you're not. You're not really in Japan or the Philippines. You're in England or London. You gotcha.
Well, I think um, if you're in another country and your your thought crimes are showing up in England, that's a crime in England, and I don't think they're gonna go to the other side of the world or another country to drag somebody in over that. But if you're in England, they'll get you, right?
Or persona non grata. You can't go to England anymore. Like the thing with Lauren Southern.
Yep.
You're undesirable. You can't come in anymore.
But and speaking of Lauren Southern, and we were talking about this um, a few days ago. The issue that she brings up is immigration of Islam into Europe, Islamic people into Europe, and you had one take on it, that is it being blown out of proportion?
I have. I'm not. I haven't been following it that closely, but I get the sense that it is a little bit blown out of proportion. Like mostly, I know about it from YouTube, and so it's filtering it through a bunch of different lenses. Like Black Pigeon Speaks. I don't really trust him, and he has an obvious axe to grind and an obvious bias. But I like to keep an eye on him, like seeing how some people are spinning this. Like every little thing is the caliphate coming for Europe. And there's been some debunkings of that. Like there's another YouTuber, Sean, doing a breakdown of how some people are spinning it that there's so many crimes committed by immigrants, and it's just they're turning everything into a crime, like someone littering, and they put it on a map. Like, well, Swazli, another YouTuber, has a pretty good take on it. I think that there's some danger to having immigrants come in, obviously, but it's not really that bad. It's not all that outrageous. There are some things like Sharia courts that, like, the Telford thing. The Telford thing, I think, is like
The grooming gang issue.
symptomatic of symptomatic of everything. Like, the Telford thing blows up, goes trending on Twitter and Reddit, and I look into it and wow, this seems like uh, totally a Black Pigeon speak sort of thing. Like this huge conspiracy, and the BBC's not talking about it. No one wants to touch it because it's Islam, and no one wants to be accused of Islamophobia. Is it really this? And I look into it. It's like a report came out. A report came out saying that there was this thing that happened, and it's on Wikipedia. Wikipedia says it was a thing a couple years ago, like 2007, 2009, and there were a bunch of people that were doing this, and this was something that happened, and it's bad. But the guys were caught and they're in jail. So it's like the right spins it as like the Anders Breivik fever dream that Islam will conquer Europe, and the right spins it as the left just closes its eyes and doesn't want to talk about it. And then it kind of is a little bit that the left doesn't talk it up as much as they should. But usually you can find some sort of truth in the middle. Like there's some rising crime, not really that much, but people like Black Pigeon Speaks will sensationalize every little thing and turn it into this tide of this horde of barbarians
Hmm.
rushing into Europe. But pretty much it turns into something a lot more sober from what I see. And another thing that I've always been curious of since way back is the Philippines has a pretty sizable Muslim population, and we have actual no-go zones. Like this is a Muslim ghetto, like pretty much a literal ghetto. Some of it's fairly rundown, lower class stuff, and you don't want to go in there because you'll get robbed or beaten up or something. But other than that, it's pretty benign all around. Uh, People interact with Muslims, buy from them, sell to them. It's no big deal. Like they've got the headscarves, and it's no big thing. Like
But it
I
isn't part of the issue. We talked about this, that in the Philippines, the Muslim zones are the same ethnic background as the Christians, or um, isn't that the case? They're not large amounts of people from the Middle East immigrating, and so it's easier. In Europe, it's an assimilation issue where um, people are coming in from another part of the world, and they think of it's perceived that they think of themselves as Muslims first, and um, European, British, or French or German subjects second, and that's threatening to people that identify with their nationality.
That's probably part of it, but it's still something that baffles and fascinates me a little bit. Like, remember the Charlie Hebdo stuff and Gillen's Posten and stuff about Draw Mohammed? I remember reading and seeing stuff all over the news how there are riots and mobs all over the world. But here, nothing. Nothing. Like, uh, so what? No reaction here.
Well, when we talk about people, um, when the issue of tolerance comes up, and every day, people all over the world. when you live in a place where you're you're with people with different religions or non-religions or ethnicities, skin colors, we get along. We work together. We shop together. We do, our social life together. And you mentioned if it's a ghetto, that it's more insular, but people get along all over the world.
Yeah, it's a sort of interesting, sort of benign neglect. Like it's a thing here. Like Eid al Adha is a legal holiday. I remember Eid al Adha was a legal holiday, and I went to the park, and there were Muslims at prayer, and it struck me that here it's no big deal. It's like they do their thing and we do ours.
What is the percent of Muslim population where you live?
Not sure about the number.
It's
Like they're
small.
sizable
It's okay.
and more concentrated in the south. So there's that. In the southern part of the Philippines, like there are actual Muslim rebels and people get kidnapped and killed, and that's a thing. But up here, there's still a lot of Muslims and Muslim ghettos, but it's pretty benign all around.
So the issue in Europe is, I see it as, when you see the reports about the grooming gangs, and what what I try to look at it with an eye of like, um, if you're living a nice comfortable life and you see reports of horrible things happening, you don't see it in your life, but for the people that are affected by it, it's um, it has a greater impact. And we have people on the extremes, who they call them conspiracy theorists. They say that this issue isn't being talked about; it's being covered up. And as you mentioned, sometimes the truth is somewhere in the middle, where um, the fact that it's not being talked about is proof that it's being covered up when it may not be covered up. However, the issue that keeps coming up in England, in the UK, is that the police are afraid of, when they talk about the so-called no-go zones in the UK, that the police are afraid of arresting Muslims because they'll be called racist. And I'm
Yeah, it
wondering if
looks like there really are. There really is some of that, like from Rotherham before and Telford. Like there's some sort of kid gloves treatment going on. That does seem to be part of the case, but it's not like they've got carte blanche and they can do whatever they want. So there has been some response. Like that was the whole thing, and that's what brought Telford up again. Was that a report came out and some of the guys that went to jail were getting out, and some people were campaigning to keep them locked up. But they did catch a bunch of guys, and the cops are saying that was most of them. Or if there's anything left, they'd be interested, and that's something they'd pursue. But they feel like they got the guys that did it back in 2007 to 2009.
well, this is dovetails with the rise of nationalism in Europe, and I think it's directly tied with immigration. And part of it is, I think that there's with when you have a country that's primarily one ethnic type of people, the people that are native to that country, and the other comes in, there's a natural fear. Uh, there's the economic fear. They're taking our jobs in the United States. The issue with immigration from the South. They're taking our jobs, and then on the one side they say, well, these are jobs that nobody here wants to take, like picking strawberries or produce, working in the fields, and then From my experiences, um, being in shops that are filled with people that are here illegally, it actually the reality is it depresses the citizens' wages because there's a um, mass of people that are being underpaid, and why should we pay you anymore? We could just bring in more of those.
Yeah, cheap labor. That's us here, Philippines. Like uh, labor costs in China are going up. Some factories are moving to here in the Philippines because the cost of a Chinese labor, that cost is going up, but Filipinos are still dirt cheap. So we're getting some of the business flowing out of China and some other places. That's the thing. It's something that'll be complex and messy working out. So I'd like to believe that with automation and universal basic income, eventually it'll be something that'll shake out and work well for everyone. Of course, it's gonna be a rough, bumpy road getting there. But how do you feel like has has the U.S. given up on the idea of a cosmopolitan melting pot?
I Well, the problem with that issue is it's too tied to emotions. So when I see people that are here illegally working, they've left their families or children behind, and they're working in virtual sweatshop environments. It doesn't strike me that they've they've swum across the river so they could collect welfare. Seems like there's a lot of sacrifice, and so and they're paying taxes, and so there's on one hand there's the reality that you have people working very hard for low wages, and on the other hand you have there are people that cross into countries that aren't interested in illegal life. They're doing illegal things, drug smuggling or other things that are unsavory and not good for the people. But there's a fear factor that they're going to displace us. They're going to take our jobs. That they just want to suck up our resources, and it's too tied to emotions. Um, so yes, we're a melting pot, and I think the melting pot issue is whoever is part of the melting pot historically, as of this year, sees the next newcomer, the next invader, as the enemy, because at a couple hundred years ago it was mostly British, German, French in North America, Spanish, and then
It's one of
the Irish and the
it's one of the common
Italians.
fantasies, right?
What's that?
It's one of the common fantasies that one thing that unites a country is if they have an external enemy, and it's like an almost unspoken fantasy that you'll see in some right wing thought is that if the U.S. went to war with North Korea or China or Russia or something, at least then that would unite the nation because we have a clear external enemy, and then it would. I'm not white or black or blue or anything anymore. I'm American, and those damn Russians are the enemy.
Yeah, that's always the case. But with the melting pot issue here, it's complicated because there's reality. We see the DACA issue. Children brought in. If you're a baby and you're brought to this country and you grow up here, a lot of people are sympathetic. This is the only country you've known. On the other hand, they were brought here illegally. So it's if you get tied up in the emotions, you can't process those two real issues, and they're two legitimate issues. So if you fall on one side, they deserve whatever we think they deserve. They should be citizens. They should be they were brought here, or on the other side, they were brought here illegally. You break the law, children, a child doesn't break a law, but their guardians, their parents do. Should they automatically get the benefits of citizenship? And you can't
like
have
I
that
think,
discussion if it's tied up in emotions.
and yeah, setting emotion aside is a pretty hard stunt at the best of times. But I think one of the things I would hold out hope for is if people were more curious about what the other side is thinking or saying. And I think it's one of the biggest things that sets me apart from the classical left is that I'm actually curious about what the other side says. So I actually enjoy finding fringe or straight up alt right voices and listening to what they have to say because I'm not afraid that I'll get infected with their cooties or whatever. I looked at Stormfront. I read Mein Kampf. I'm not scared that that's gonna turn me into some sort of Nazi. And yeah, I keep an eye on Black Pigeon Speaks and some other weird people on YouTube talking about how race mixing is bad and like fundamentally sinful in some weird biological way. And it's like, huh, it's an interesting take, unconvincing and easy to argue against. But I wish there were more of that, like actual intellectual curiosity. And I think that was one of the things Lindsay Shepard was trying for is let's take a look at what these people have to say. And if it's wrong, then it's wrong.
Well, I'm
There's
I'm the
no
same way now.
need to actually. Sorry.
I'm the same way now, where more and more, as we get older, people tend to a lot of people tend to get more narrow in their thinking, more insular, and but a lot of people, as they mature, um, they want to hear what other people have to say. They want to hear what the other side has to say, and what a lot of us have discovered, you've discovered, is that if you're insecure in your convictions, if it's a house of cards that can be easily knocked over, you don't want to hear the other arguments. I think that's what the kind of at the heart of it. And so if I have a viewpoint on something and somebody challenges it, I'm welcome to have them challenge it. And it's not if my thinking if the way I came to that conclusion was based on um, it wasn't really informed, then maybe I'll correct the way I think about it. And that's how I think about it. We can't grow as people if we just stick our fingers in our ear and go 99. I can't hear you. That kind of thing.
Yeah, like I think it's one of the reasons why what used to be atheism and skepticism before that's turned into anti SJW now is it came from a school that was good at reading what the other people are saying. So like there was that study that atheists know the Bible and other religions better than most religions do because they look at it from an outsider perspective and learn to look at things objectively. There's a need for that. People who are uh, outside of traditional tribes, not right or not left or centrist or some other. Uh, the hard thing is that it doesn't play as well. Like it's what you see both on the right and on the left is playing into outrage culture. Like look at what the right goes. Look at what these stupid hippies are talking about and their stupid hug boxes and so on. And the left just labels everyone on the other side as alt right or Nazis. No one wants to really seriously engage with the other people's ideas.
Well, you mentioned the atheist community, the skeptic community, and a lot of those people, probably most of them, came to a conclusion. They were brought up in a religious environment and thought about it. Whereas um, if you're religious, oftentimes you don't think about it. That's what your parents are. That's what everybody around you is. And um, we I did. I think the last video I did was on David Silverman, and he was when his last book came out, Fighting God. Now he's in trouble. He's fighting the atheist community, but his book Fighting God came out. He was invited to talk in China because generations of Chinese people were brought up as non-religious. They didn't reason themselves into that. They just that's just the way it was. And I don't remember. I think it's I don't know if it was the government or corporations invited them over because they were afraid that they would be easily converted to religion because they hadn't made a conclusion to become atheists. They just that's just the way it was. So they're vulnerable.
Yeah, like in the conversation, it's the standard thing: free speech that's mocked as free speech and so on. But like another important part of it is not just the right to speak, but the right to listen. I want to hear what this guy says, but heckler's veto, and someone's gonna pull a fire alarm, and then I don't get to hear what the other guy says. Uh, that's still defeatable in some ways. What we can see is a lot of extreme viewpoints just go to the internet, and it's one of the interesting things is like I think Steven Pinker talked about this is uh, coddled leftists that grew up and had their safe space universities just don't know how to challenge these ideas when they're confronted with it. Like when they're shown actual statistics that crime is higher in black neighborhoods. Therefore, racism is justified. But there are actual counter arguments to that. The classic argument that it's systemic racism, and that can be problematic as well. But at least it's a conversation. But the thing is that these ideas are so verboten and just forbidden from even being talked about that they don't have any resistance to these ideas when they're confronted with it. It's just
You're talking about
all they
Steven
have.
Pinker. Steven Pinker.
Yeah,
He wants to have a conversation about something that's controversial, but they don't want us to have the conversation like about race. We can't get to the bottom of the issues if we can't discuss the issues, and those are controversial. So if if it's just because of um, inherent racism in the system, then it's an easy. We have like you said we have a villain and we have the victim. But if we can't talk about the root causes of crime, then we can't have the discussion. If we just conclude that it's the evil white patriarchy, then if it's not 100% the evil white patriarchy, we're never going to solve the problem. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, like lots of things. Like what were the other examples? Like that capitalist countries do better than communist countries, therefore anarcho-capitalism makes sense. So that's an easy conclusion to draw if you haven't been engaged in the argument. But then the counter argument is that social safety net places like the Nordic countries are actually doing better in lots of measurable ways. It's like if we could just actually have a conversation about these things, we could get to some interesting and useful places. But it's just even starting to talk about these things, you're automatically labeled racist or transmisogynist or whatever, unclean. Like the Sam Harris Ezra Klein debate, I think it's starting to circulate now, and it gets pretty obvious that it's just two people talking past each other for like 2 hours, and it's pretty frustrating. But yeah, the science can't be denied, and it's stuff that's just gonna come out.
That's the well. What's the term? The argument from what's the new thing that there's? It's escaping me right now. The argument from the middle. What's the term? It's called.
The argument for what moderation?
Yeah, yeah. So that says that on the left, or say politically or culturally, on the left there's one view, and on the right there's one view, and somewhere in the middle is maybe the reasonable view, somewhere we can meet. And the that concept says that's not true, that there's no middle ground, that people on one side are right and everyone else is wrong. So, and you mentioned Steven Pinker, and a lot of intellectuals are coming out and saying, well, once you become a centrist, that's now you're now a racist, you're now a Nazi. So, I what do you see the future of that? I mean, if there's a movement right now. It started with the skeptics, then the anti SJWs, and now we have this. I see it as like a centrist movement.
I think one some things that could be encouraging is like developments in psychology and neuroscience. How it's becoming pretty solid science. How tribalism and bad thinking are really pretty fundamental in human thinking. Like that famous Anita Sarkeesian clip where she says everything is sexist, everything is racist,
Racist,
everything
everything is
is homophobic.
homophobic.
The famous clip. It's like reading some of the science books now on neuroscience and evolutionary psychology. It's like an idea that you can get to that's really, really seductive and convincing is the idea that everything is tribalism and everything is virtue signaling and everything is social status games. Because there really is some pretty solid science behind that. And if that's something that could become more popular and people become self-aware that this is the game that we're playing, that when it becomes obvious to everyone that these are the games that we're playing, uh, in the Sam Harris Ezra Klein debate, I think one interesting thing is so Ezra Klein is like the physical embodiment of SJW argumentation. And his accusation is that so you're saying we're playing identity politics, but I'm accusing you, Sam Harris, of playing the same identity politics. And Sam Harris said, no, I'm not. I'm just following the science. I think that might really be a mistake and maybe a bad mistake. You could say, yes, so this is my tribe and this is my identity. I go where the science leads. I will very deliberately betray my own side if that's what the evidence indicates. Like, it's the famous thing how people talk about trying to organize atheists is like trying to herd cats. That's a pretty good identity to have. Uh, People who are deliberately anti tribal, who really try to be heretical and not follow the crowd. It can be sort of childish sometimes, like just resistance for resistance's sake,
Hmm.
but it's a pretty good starting point.
But yeah, I agree with that if that's the truth, and I think part of it is, but part of it is that the it's not, it isn't tribal, and I think with like attempts at like atheism plus was an attempt to make it tribal because we're not. Are you a fan of football? Are you a welder? Do you paint paintings? Do you sing? Do you run in marathons? Well, that says nothing about what your beliefs or non-beliefs are. And every one of us can identify with something. We have a profession, we have interests, we have a family life. And so if you're Catholic or you're Muslim, you have an identity. If you're German, if you're Canadian, you have an identity. If you're atheist, you don't have an identity because the only thing
Because
that
it's
connects you to
negative.
other atheists is you just don't believe in that. So I don't, like, for example, um, trying to think of something that I don't do. Like I don't. I as a young person I played hockey, but okay, say I'm not a hockey fan. I don't identify with people that are we're in the same tribe because Nick, don't like hockey either. So that's how I see atheists. So I think on one side it's kind of it can't be tribal, and you have humanism where it can be tribal because they have a set of core beliefs. There's and it changes from one group to the next. There's the national and international humanists, but atheists don't have a core set of values, and that's what they try with the atheism plus, try to make it humanism. But I think that's what at the heart of non-belief is. We have nothing in common.
And
So
there's
on
some
one hand, you're right. We can't be herded like cats. Maybe we're deliberately, um, going against the grain and heretical. But on the other hand, we what do how do I identify with the person sitting next to me that doesn't believe in God? What do we have in common?
So that's an interesting conversation. I think it's some of what Jonathan Haidt and Sam Harris talk about, people trying to get atheism plus or secular humanism off the ground, which can be difficult. The two prongs of it is being the anti-tribe at least gives you some resistance to tribal thinking and makes you less susceptible to some thinking mistakes. The other side is when you need to herd these cats, you need to have something that pulls them together, and that is something that we can work out. Like it was a start, a science of human flourishing and humanism. That really is some real stuff, no matter what. It's one of the really frustrating things from that link that you sent me, the Peterson debate. Peterson keeps going back to saying that the fundamentals of morality come from religion. Like, no, man, that this is old stuff. Like, atheists can be moral, and this is uh, stuff that we can piece together. Some things are better for individuals and for countries and for humanity as a whole, and that's something we can build on. It's like inevitable. It's the right side of history, absolutely. It's just we hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Well, that you're talking about the Matt Dillahunty. I think isn't it listed as a debate with Jordan Peterson? Doesn't it say debate in the title?
Debate or did it actually
Discussion.
say debate? Something
I,
like a night with Dillahunty and
okay.
Peterson.
Well, I watched a somebody had mirrored it, so they probably put debate in the title, and I it was to me it was first of all Matt Dillahunty is one of the sharpest wits on the planet. He is one sharp guy. I wouldn't want to have to tangle with him if I was in the wrong because he'll bulldoze right over you, and he thinks on the spot. He's quick, he's sharp, and I was kind of cringing at. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. I was cringing at some of the things he was saying. Now, Deconverted Man did a did a response video to this, and I watched the beginning of it. I haven't had a chance to watch his whole response, but he was he was criticizing him, and Deconverted Man's a big Jordan Peterson fan, that he was doing what Kathy Newman was saying. So he was rephrasing what Matt Dillon. So you're saying he was doing the same tactic on him, but his his plea to this core of values that under this substrate, I don't. I'm not a real big fan of how he explains that, but I agree that in the West, the modern society is based upon the Christian values. And yes, Matt did explain that those values precede Christianity. And some would argue that it was the Dark Ages were created because Christianity had put a blanket over Europe. But whatever the case is, that we emerged out of the Dark Ages, that Western Europe emerged out of the Dark Ages with Christianity in the forefront of moralism. And I'm willing to give credit where credit is due. Um, but as you said, and as Matt said, these morals precede Christianity by thousands of years. People were civilized going back 5, 10,000 years.
And we don't need them. Like, so this was something like training wheels, or how kids need simple stories, but we don't need them anymore. We really haven't needed them for a while now.
What's really
We're
what's really
growing up.
stark is Christopher Hitchens would say, "Are you saying that my ancestors, if it hadn't been for their religion, um, the Jewish religion, they would have went around raping and murdering."
Yeah, it's like it's one of the things that Peterson keeps coming back to. That's just like total cringe. That uh, you say that you're atheist, but you're not really. Like, really, you're going there. Like, you're just gonna say that. Uh, and he said it before in a couple of other things. Like, there's another YouTuber, Rationality Speaks, or Rationality Rules. I think it's Rationality Rules, that's been doing some breakdowns on Peterson. He's done that in a couple of places. That even if some people say they're atheist, they're culturally uh, Christian or religious or some
That's
weird crap
that's
like that.
tied to presuppositional apologetics. You know that, right?
Do I know that flavor?
Well,
Like,
see, everybody knows that there's a God, and we're just denying. That's the presuppositional apologetics. If you watch the debates with like William Lane Craig, I'm getting a lot of echo, so I'm having a hard time talking here. But the Christian apologetics, if they're up against a really good wit like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, they don't do very well. But if you put the atheist in the debate into a deep hole and they have to dig themselves out, and it makes it harder for them. And that's what presuppositional apologetics say, that everyone knows there is a God. You're just denying it. That's all. So it's a position that presumes something, and that's what he was saying to Matt Dillahunty.
and that seems pretty presumptuous and like really, come on. Like, and the thing he comes that keeps coming back to Dostoevsky. Like, if you're really not religious, then you see nothing wrong with murder or being selfish. Like, it is something baffling me. Like, when my girlfriend first recommended Peterson to me, I read a little bit and what is this stuff? Like, and I wondered, does he not know the prisoner's dilemma? Isn't he a psychologist or psychiatrist? And I googled Peterson, prisoner's dilemma. He co-wrote a paper on the prisoner's dilemma. How does he not know this? How can he not put this together? We can't build a completely secular morality independent of religion. It's simple.
Well, as I was cringing through the Peterson Dillahunty talk discussion, I was also thinking that, okay, Matt Dillahunty is not fearful, and he even says that, I believe in there, not fearful of hearing contradictory opinions. Um, doesn't disquiet him. And I to give Jordan Peterson some credit, I don't think that was his best, his finest moment, but he didn't fear. He knew who he was up against. Probably knew who he was up against, and yet maybe he'll learn from it, and that's a hallmark of a great mind.
Like, I think I've been out of the atheist game for a while now, but it what Peterson reminds me of is another thing from back in the day, the atheist days, the Gish Gallop. It seems to be his trademark thing, the Gish Gallop, and it's like, I you watch one Peterson video on YouTube, and YouTube's gonna recommend Peterson videos to you forever. You're never gonna get it off your recommended feed. But I've seen some of his stuff, like talking about how Pinocchio is a metaphor for Christ. Like, what? Yeah, it's pure pattern recognition. It's just building patterns out of nothing. It's all stories are somehow about the struggle of mankind against its baser nature. Which, okay, that can be amusing, but one is it's not original. Like Joseph Campbell and uh, Kazantzakis, I think did it a lot better.
And who?
And Kazantzakis, Nikos Kazantzakis,
Okay.
uh, Nikos Kazantzakis, I think is like one of the guys up there with Nietzsche. It's one of the interesting things about humanity's struggle with God or against God. But anyway, it's like, yeah, it's something you can find. Like you can find depth in the Bible or Harry Potter or any book at random. If that's what you feel like, you can find deep philosophical meanings in Winnie the Pooh or Alice in Wonderland, if that's your thing.
And to be honest, it's possible that some of these stories were metaphors for those things.
Well, yeah, like Death of the Author. If people want to find their life meaning in Harry Potter, you could do worse. It's something.
I haven't read Harry Potter. I haven't read Harry Potter.
Yeah, I haven't either. I watch the movies, but and it's something that I'm sort of building up on is something like anti stories because the world is really complicated and thinking about it in terms of stories is bad, a bad way to do it. But it's another one of the things like the easy trap that we fall into is thinking in terms of tribes and my tribe versus other tribe and my tribe, right or wrong, we need to win and their tribe needs to be crushed. There are no bad tactics, only bad targets.
Well, Sam Harris does talk about tribes in The End of Faith, I believe, tribalism, and he gets attacked for not recognizing tribalism. It's the ironic.
Like I think Jonathan Haidt is still doing pretty interesting stuff in this field. Uh, there's lots of things that I disagree with in height stuff, but it's like one of the breakthrough things that I think is pretty important is how people have talked about it. They can do brain scans and tell with about 70% accuracy whether someone is conservative or liberal, or whether someone's liberal or Democrat or Republican. So we've got some solid foundational stuff on this, and Jonathan Hyde starting on that. Like I think one really interesting thing is like on an intuitive level, I'm probably conservative, but I've learned to lean more to the left.
Is that social or political issues or both?
Uh, what's the term? Like people say fiscally conservative, but socially something, socially liberal. It's like some of sometimes when some of the alt right people talk about degeneracy, it's like they lose me. Like if people want to sleep around or do whatever, they're free to do that. Degeneracy doesn't turn me off.
Well, what I've been reading about lately is the culture wars, and this is in context with the Trump presidency and how people on the right feel that they've lost the cultural war, that it's gone, they've lost it. And if you look back, um, a lot of issues which we take for granted as human rights, marriage equality, or your skin color, your sex, um, there's been resistance going back generations for equality. And
It's one
so
of the
it
sad things, right? Like
what
I remember it wasn't so long ago. Like if you say something like Uh, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That used to be like just basic lefty orthodoxy. Like, of course, like who would disagree with that? But so this is where we are now, where platforming, platforming people with wrong think is a sin, and deplatforming is a standard tactic. And things like, I have a dream. I have a dream where people are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we're rolling back on that, and that still boggles me. Like, we don't want that anymore, apparently.
Well, I in my in my profession, I'm forced to judge people by the content of their character. I will not succeed if I judge people by outward things. And so the best people for the best jobs, I need to be doing their best. And I make judgments, and it doesn't matter what you look like or what you believe. You make me successful. And so that flies in the face of how I've been living my professional career for years.
Well, what field is this? Is this tech? Like, because there's James Damore.
Well, I dabble into the tech. I straddle a few worlds because I'm in technically in manufacturing, but I do a lot of tech. But I've also spent years as a like in a managerial position, supervisor, managerial, and so the way I think of success is not how cool you think you are, how good you think you are. So the people that work for you, how they make you look good. And if you have that attitude and you act upon it and act upon it correctly, you will succeed by the people that you're supervising or managing. And so you need people to be their best. And in you don't always have the choice in picking who works for you, and so you get different people of different backgrounds. So um, what what has helped me be successful is judging people by how they are, how they what they do. And if I had prejudged people by their gender, their sex, or their skin color, I'd probably be a failure because I would have eliminated a lot of people that helped me do well. And now you're talking about the left is saying I have to judge people by those very things that will hurt me. I will say, okay, I have to have certain percent of people of this type working for me, this type, rather than the best. So I've been in environments where um, it was mostly um, brown skinned people working, or mostly women working for me, and that worked out. I didn't have a choice. That's the people I was given to work with. So if I said no, I got to equal this out and put a percent of different people, then I wouldn't be choosing the best people for the job. I'd be choosing a quota, and
Some
that's
people
that's
talk
just a
about that. Like,
practical. That's the practical look. That's not philosophical. It's just a practical outlook. So I've been forced to judge people by who they are and what they do for years.
and it's one of the ways that you can diagnose the new left is, some people have called it like the new romanticism. Like, what's primary above reality is feelings. So if I feel that I'm a woman, therefore I'm a woman, regardless of my genitals or uh, my chromosomes. So if I feel that I'm a different race, so this is apparently a thing now. So we've got transsexuals, and now it's transracialism. Like, it was one of the things that's really fascinating. So the trans thing, and it's a real thing, but it's like trans people are like zero point 0.3 or zero point 0.5 of the population,
It's very
and
small.
it's a real thing, and I know trans people, and so yeah, but it can't really be this prevalent, the real thing. So the term that's come up is being transgender, like it's the hip new thing to be trans, and you would think that people would push against that, but no, they've just really rolled with it. So that's if you feel that you're trans, then you're trans, and the left hasn't backed down on that. So they've really doubled down on it, and then Rachel Dolezal comes out, and there's another one there. So there's Rachel Dolezal, and there's another one that actually claims that she's trans Filipino. That sort of made me laugh. It was a thing on Twitter. I don't remember the guy's name. Was it a guy? Anyway, he likes watching our TV apparently, and so he says he's trans Filipino, and okay, so you can roll with that. He's not gonna get any cultural appropriation complaints from this side. But so this is the thing now. So if you feel that you're a thing, then you are that thing, and up to a point we can indulge that, but that's the thing. So how much do I have to cooperate with supporting your identity
Do,
as trans or otherkin or furry?
do you think that the line is when it interferes with reality? So we we accept people. It sounds like you and I both accept people for what they say they are. Okay, I'm I'm a dragon spirit or a fuzzy otherkin or whatever. Okay, fine, great. But then when you change reality and say you have to accept my version of reality, in other words, there's no um, there's nothing can be defined anymore. No, the postmodernist, the whole postmodernist thing where there's no object reality, and so if you want to drag me into that, then we got a problem because I'll
Yeah, it's the thing.
accept
Like,
you're a human being. You have two eyes, you have a nose, you have ears, and that's fine with me. I have no problem with you. I didn't describe what you look like. You're a human being, and you're a human being to me. But then when you start trying to change my reality, then that becomes a problem.
and infringing on rights. Like, I'll use preferred pronouns generally, like just to get along or just to be nice and be polite. Yeah, preferred pronouns, okay. But if you make it a hate crime for me to use the wrong pronouns, fuck you. I'm not playing along with that.
So there's the issue of regulation versus consideration. That's what you're talking about. So you're considerate of people, but when it's forced upon you,
Yeah, it's like I think one of the useful things that's sort of a reality check is watching SJW craziness and knowing that this is a thing in Western countries and Europe and Australia a little bit, but mostly it doesn't play in lots of other places. Like preferred pronouns really is pretty much just a US thing. Uh,
Canada.
imagine imagine trying to do preferred pronouns in German or Spanish. That's a total non-starter. People are just gonna laugh you out of the room. Trying to do that with really gendered languages like German or Spanish or other things.
Well, even especially German, because nouns have genders.
Yeah, and it's one of the sort of escapes. It SJW stuff just really gets tiresome because it's really fucking everywhere on the internet. But like coming back to reality out here, like ridiculous crap like fat acceptance and body positivity, that doesn't play here or in China or lots of other places.
Well, we're talking about parts of the world where there's not an overabundance of obese people, probably, right?
Well, yeah, and there's no social stigma towards calling that out. people are just gonna say you're fat, you should lose some weight,
As a concern for health.
or like straight up meanness. It's like that's just how things roll.
Oh, you
It's
guys are
like
mean over there. You probably smoke cigarettes too.
yeah, yeah, there's still a fair bit of that.
Well, okay. So, do you think that that the SJW phenomenon is so? I'll be talking to somebody, and not on the internet because it's a real one-on-one conversation is a little bit different sometimes. And so you're face to face with somebody, and they say, this is just, on on campuses, or it's not a big thing. It really doesn't have a big part in society. And if you look around, you really don't see it in your everyday life. Do you think it's just they're like a loud minority online?
It's a tricky question. It's like there, and it's sort of like asymmetrical warfare. There are some places where they're gaining ground. There are some places where they sort of dominate. Like the SJW playbook is, they've pretty much co-opted or invaded lots of spaces like universities, video games, comic books, and then you start to see places, things like what used to be mostly male hobbies invaded by SJWs, and then we have to have more women, or we have to have more minorities. One of the YouTubers I follow is a guy commentating on comics. Like I stopped following comics a while ago, but it's sort of looking back into that world where he talks about how SJWs have taken over Marvel, the comic book Marvel, and it's sales tanked and comic book stores are closing because all they're doing with their comics now is virtue signaling, and it's sort of a sense that maybe the tide is turning, and Marvel might be coming back to something like something more reality based. Uh, it's the same sort of thing. It's like SJWs are winning in some arenas. They're not really world powers. They might become world powers at some point. I hope not. In some places they're winning, in some places they won, in some places they're losing ground.
Well, one of the parts when you talk about representation, like in comics or in movies, if you look at, uh, I think Thunderfoot and a few others did videos on this, where they looked at the actual representation, um, mirrored the percents of population.
Mhm.
So, in other words, if you have 10% of a type of people in your country, and they're represented about 10% of the time in everything, in movies, TV, then there's no big issue with that. When you should 10% represent 90%, and so that was facts and figures from the, I guess, the film industry. Um, so when we already have, we're talking about parts of the world where, after the Enlightenment and with democracies and laws and constitutions where basic rights are enshrined, we stop becoming places where everybody, only a few percent of people had the rights. And now, theoretically, everyone has the same rights in many places throughout the world, not just in Europe, North America, but all over the world, South America, all over Asia. And when you have those intrinsic rights, and yet we're still this horrible white male patriarchy. It's not that's how I got lost. They lost me a few years ago when I looked around, and I don't see I don't see that. And if I If I lived in an American inner city, I might see it. But I work in one.
Wait, you don't see what?
I don't
What
see
do
a
you not see?
disconnect between rights that people have and the
And
rights that they
their
live
race.
under. Meaning we don't have, from my viewpoint, we don't have like like the apartheid in South Africa. We don't have, or some percent of the population doesn't have rights. Every percent of the population has the same rights. Now, when you get into classes, if you have a lot of money, you have a lot more opportunities than somebody that has no money. That's a given. But that person with no money has the same opportunity as the person next to them to be to have whatever they work for. And it doesn't work out for everybody. Not everybody is entrepreneurial enough to strike out and start IBM or something. But we all have the same rights. What do you in the Philippines? How is it there? It's a democracy. People have the same rights. Are there anybody that is excluded?
Uh, yeah, pretty much. So there's no actual like discrimination on the books. There are some people that would say some populations are more marginalized, like uh, that if you're gay, you're more likely to be a victim of a hate crime. There's some of that, and there's some evidence for it. So yeah, okay. Same thing as if you're a woman, you're more at risk uh, of being a victim of a violent crime, possibly in some situations.
But
In
that's,
terms of
yeah, I
actual
agree with
rights,
that.
pretty much
But
everyone's
th-
equal.
that's not. Um, so if you live in a country where, um, okay, so say you're in Iran or Saudi Arabia, the laws that you live under say that these half of the population don't have the same rights as the other half. What I'm talking about
Institutionalized
is, so
sexism.
hate crimes. If everyone has the same, in theory, everyone has the same rights, and there's hate crimes. That's a separate issue removed from their rights. We can't. Um, when we have laws and we have a justice system, it doesn't prevent it. It punishes someone for a crime. It doesn't prevent them from doing the crime.
You're talking about like just basic equality before the law.
Yes,
So yeah, pretty much. Like there's some like class resentment. It's not really based on anything else. Like Filipinos are racist. Like for real, there's been some actual studies about this, but it's pretty benign racism.
racists within the Philippines, like say people of Spanish or Chinese descent, or
Yeah,
in
like
that way.
there's a popular stereotype that Chinese people are rich and greedy and underhanded, and Muslims will rip you off. Again, it's not universal, but it's like common stuff that's in the water that's circulating around the culture. Mostly, it's stuff that's there. It's mostly pretty benign. Like, if I were like a typical Filipino, I distrust the Muslim down the street, but I'll buy from him. It's no big deal.
That's what we're getting into attitudes, but
Yeah,
everyone has the same rights.
pretty much. Yeah.
And so what
On the book.
Richard Dawkins Richard Dawkins talked about raising awareness um, about the issues that are important to non-believers, and what people around the world have done is raise awareness to um, equality, so that even though there are stereotypes and um, there's biases and racism and bigotry, that um, that's not directly tied to the equality of the system you live in. That's an individual. Um, So as we become aware that other people are other people and we don't hate them for looking different, that's separate from um, are they treated different in the eyes of the law? And
So
where it sounds like
there's
I'm
nothing like a
rambling, but
partial
where this ties in
agreement on the
with
books.
me is the SJWs are obsessed with that. There's like you would think that you're outside of the United States, you would think that there's like white patriarchs running up and down the streets with horses with swords, going after people that are not like them. And it's not like that.
Like, I think it's a complicated thing. Like, a lot of people have said, like, if you're poor and black, you really have more in common with someone who's poor and white than you would have with someone who's rich and black. But uh, I think, from what I know, so of course I've never been there, but from what I've read and from what I've heard, it does look like, institutional racism or systemic racism probably really is a thing. How that should be addressed is complex, of course. Is affirmative action really the best thing for that? Maybe not. Maybe something that's really more straightforwardly means tested. Like, if you're not making this much money, maybe you get uh, some money from the government, regardless of race. Maybe, but like, some studies that are been pretty solid is like, stuff that's often quoted, like, if you have a black name on a resume, it's less likely to get a callback or an interview. Like, I've heard that some black people even know about this. Like, if you've got a name like Lamar, don't put Lamar on your resume. Like, use your middle name, Michael, because you've got a better shot at getting a job that way.
Well, that's true, and there's with renting, they found that they did studies, and so the, there's a difference between the law says you can't do that, and when these laws are new, it makes it illegal to do certain things. You don't change everyone's hearts, and that comes with time, raising awareness. With the and there are people, no matter where you are, that are going to not like the other, somebody that's not like them. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. If you're a different religion or a different skin color or a different ethnic background, there's going to be prejudice. There's going to be biases. It's kind of hardwired into our survival thing. But as we make the laws first, sometimes the the popular opinion comes before the law, and that's what drives it. But other times it's just so it becomes indefensible. Like we had in the United States, slavery was legal, and people were against it, wanted to stop it because it was immoral, it was wrong, and others thought, well, it'll just die of its own because it's immoral and it's wrong. But it was ended, and we also had the right to vote was only was limited to male, rich, wealthy, landowning white males, and then eventually everybody was included in that right. So, so if you go back 150 years, you got something to cry about. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that there aren't any problems now. There are issues, but we're growing, we're changing, and I think you pointed out the issue with being forced to say pronouns. You can create laws, but you can't change people's hearts.
Yeah, and it's a bad idea to even try.
So we say it's not right to discriminate against somebody because of whatever their religion or their skin color. And when we believe that, it will become less common. But What is intrinsic is that these rights are in our laws and our constitution. They're already there. So you have people acting badly. These these mass shootings, do they represent a type of person? Yeah, they do. They represent the mentally insane. But what happens every time there is one? People on the left, they bring up the gun laws, and also tied to that is um, I see this all the time when there's a it's a white Christian shooter. Oh, see, if he was Muslim, everybody would be it'd be all over the newspapers. Well, I would have no problem with calling a white Christian shooter a Christian terrorist if they said praise God, praise Jesus, and then started running over people or shooting people. The difference is that the Islamic terrorists say Allahu Akbar and then start driving over people or blowing up bombs. And I know I kind of strayed there, but it kind of ties in with the all these acts are, I believe, to commit mass murder is you have to be mentally ill. You cannot be you cannot have a sound mind, and that's what they have in common.
I guess yeah, you could make that case. Uh, that it can't be rational to hmm
So you have a
like
law. You can't kill people, right? So
yeah
does that mean I can't kill other white people, or does it mean I can kill women or I can kill black? No, it means you can't kill anybody. So we have laws saying you know, and so the law isn't going to stop me from doing it, stop somebody from doing it. I would never do it, but it's the law is not going to stop. It may for a normal person, with somebody with sound mind, they might say, you know what, I don't want to be shot by a cop doing this, or I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. So, but I think most people don't go around killing people. We talked about this with the religious issue. It's just kind of a survival thing. The reason, and I think Matt Dillahunty said this, or was this another debate I recently watched? No, because I don't go around killing or robbing people because I don't want it done to me. It's a survival thing. And so if we thought it was
yeah it's
okay to go
a
around killing each other, then we wouldn't
it's a basic
survive.
empathy thing.
Well, it's yeah, and so so when you have somebody that you have a law saying killing is illegal and you'll go to jail or you'll be executed, it's not going to stop some small percent of the population. The same with racism. You're not allowed to discriminate somebody in a job. It's not going to stop an employer from not hiring somebody. And you're right, there was that study about the names, but a law is not going to stop somebody. If you find that they've done it, they can be held accountable. And now we get into like the Me Too movement, where if you've done horrible things to people, and it's the Me Too movement focuses on men groping or raping or assaulting women, and we know that it happens that men do get assaulted, but the focus is on men against women. So if you have the Harvey Weinstein's, they hopefully will face their day of judgment because it's against the law to do those things. And so we have laws saying you can't do that, but it's not going to stop an individual from, you know, violating that law, violating someone's rights. You have parts of what I'm trying to say is you have parts of the world where the SJWs are concerned with, where in there are no rights for half the people or some large percent of the population. And so
Yeah,
if
some
you're
of the
in,
standard things they talk about, like where are the feminists speaking up about Saudi Arabia or anything else like that. Like all they can talk about is man spreading or petty crap like that.
mansplaining and manspreading, right? And so it's it's to me, it's really manifest. So if you're a horrible, if you're a parent and you're very disciplinary, you're a harsh disciplinarian, your children are not going to speak out against you. They're afraid because they're going to get the back of the hand. They're going to get punished. They're going to get popped in the face. But if you're a progressive or a liberal parent and you say, just say the kids feel comfortable expressing themselves around you, they're the parents that are going to get the shit. They're going to hear it from their kids because they're allowed to. They won't get popped in the nose. They won't get punched in the face for talking back to their parents. And I see a direct correlation to how the SJWs, and we're free. We're so free that he can do this. And when you mentioned Saudi Arabia, imagine like Linda Sarsour doing a rainbow flag march through Jihad or something, or Jeddah. What's the name of it? What's their capital? Uh, Crap, I forget the name of it. Whatever their
I
capital is,
don't know.
Riyadh. That's it. So we wouldn't like people are arrested. Foreigners are arrested for adultery in Saudi Arabia. You remember that was a year or two ago? That woman that was arrested.
And yeah, it's a headline, right? A while ago, in Saudi Arabia, women are now allowed to drive. Yay! Like progress.
Well, aren't they the progressives? But that's right. That you've hit on exactly um, what's so glaring about the whole SJW movement or whatever it is that they're kicking and screaming against probably okay. Let's take Noam Chomsky. Are you familiar with Noam Chomsky?
Yeah,
Okay,
a little
so
bit.
he's pretty pessimistic. He attacks the West. He attacks the United States for our crimes and our sins on humanity, and yet he expresses in the same in the same talk how it's the best, most free free place to live in the world. It's the you have the most rights. We have never had it better as far as rights. And so, even as pessimistic as he is, he recognizes that liberal democracies are the best places to live.
Yeah, is there anyone gonna contest that? Like some people might say that the Nordic countries are doing better. That's still pretty questionable.
Well, what's it like? Denmark has supposedly the best standard of living. It's not an issue of like who's better. It's an issue of tied to the um, complaining about a system that already addresses all the issues.
It's one of those things like, man, it comes back to what people talk about when you take away environmental pressures and no one has to like uh, live in fear of starving to death or having to uh, hunt to get food and not starve. When you take away evolutionary pressures, what people fall back to is tribe games and making sure my click beats your click. It's like high school writ large. It becomes high school drama all over the place because there's nothing else for them to do.
So basically, nitpicking over the little details as opposed to the big details have been worked out.
Yeah, pretty much like uh, you're very unlikely to starve even if you lose everything. So there's a social safety net. So there's nothing really to struggle for or against. So what people fall back to is tribe games and signaling games. And that's what a lot of it is. Like, coming back to what people say, like, if there was a war, or even like weird wish fulfillment, I wish there was a war. Like, I think that's one of the really basic things why zombie stories are so popular, or dystopia stories.
Or alien invasion.
uh, when the zombie dystopia comes, or when everything turns to shit and the aliens are raining death from the skies, then no one gives a shit about man spreading anymore.
well,
It's like the fantasy of the reality check.
well, I'm sure there'd be maybe there'd be somebody would complain to a zombie that there's zombies spreading. No, you're right. You're right. If we had something to unify us, then these issues would seem minor. It would seem insignificant because its existence. You mentioned if we since we no longer have to many people no longer have to struggle just to survive. If you don't catch food, you're not going to live. So so daily survival is no longer an issue. Now you can nitpick about mansplaining.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's like, it's what people fall back on is high school drama. Like, what am I gonna wear? What did she wear? Is she friends with? Did they break up? And petty stuff like that.
So maybe we should wrap this up soon. But is there a book that you've read recently that you want to recommend?
Uh, the Rationality Quotient
By
by Keith Stanovich and some other people.
and what's good about that?
It's really dense. It's like the basic idea is like IQ is a real thing, and a lot of people push against it. IQ is real stuff. It measures something real that's significant in the world. It measures uh, real life outcomes, but it's not perfect. It's something that people would admit. So everyone knows stories about smart people doing stupid things. So Stanovich is a respected guy in psychology. The Rationality Quotient by Stanovich and I think two other co-authors. He's trying to make a test that's something like an IQ test that measures rationality. Uh, a simple pitch, or like the standard analogy that Stanovich uses, is that IQ is like horsepower in your car, and rationality is driving ability. So you can have a guy that has like a 180 IQ, but has bad social skills and is irrational in other ways, or maybe believes in some ridiculous conspiracy theory. And maybe someone with an 80 IQ that is hardworking and puts in the hours and has more success in life.
So they talk about all the factors because it's pretty like you said it's pretty complex. Is that what they do in the book?
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating book. I'll probably read it again. But Stanovich is one of the guys popularizing the idea of rationality as something separate from IQ, and it's fascinating stuff. It's breaking down a lot of other stuff. Like, it's one of the fields that I like reading into is like uh, Daniel Kahneman and Dan Ariely and other stuff that's been into rationality, right? Like cognitive biases. I think it's one of the things that's going to become a science, and it's going to be a big help. I think like studying cognitive biases is way better than studying logical fallacies. When someone says the fallacy of something something, other people just go cross-eyed, and it doesn't really convince or change anyone's mind. But if you can point out where their thinking goes wrong or goes sideways, that can be more useful.
Well, um, okay. Well, do you agree we should wrap this up?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a
We've been
pretty
going
good.
for a while. I
Yeah.
could talk all day, but
Well, we
but
can do more at some point.
we could meet again, and I'm going to be, now that I've worked out all the technical issues, I'll be doing more live streaming, and you worked out your technical issues from the beginning. So it was wonderful having this discussion with you, and I think that I'm going to be having people on here that I disagree with really soon, and you and I agree on a lot of stuff, but um, it's I think the fact that it's not contentious is because we both have the mentality that we'd like to hear what the other person has to say, not as much that we agree a lot. Um, but it's great having conversations with other people, and you learn about
Yeah.
how other people think, and um, we correct our own courses if we find that maybe we're not on the right path, um, or in your case you're recommending some books. I might crack them open and and learn about what you're talking about, because I haven't read those books. Not that I don't read books, I read plenty of books.
I'm thinking of trying like a channel that does book reviews. I don't know how well that's gonna go. I don't see book people on Twitter much, but it's something I want to try.
That's a great idea. And you know what? Book reviews are good because um, you're getting ready to make an investment of, it's usually not much money, but some time. And so talking about it should be really interesting and have some worth. So
Okay.
I thank you for spending the afternoon on this channel, and we're gonna end it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Okay. um, I will talk. I'm gonna stop streaming, and then I'll um, say goodbye offline.